Jak II is a perfect example of what happens when you lose your identity while chasing trends. When you compare this game to Jak I, you see that there are only a few similarities, while everything else feels completely different. The original Jak and Daxter, for those of you who are unaware, was a 3D collectathon platformer in the vein of Banjo-Kazooie. This game was also a technical marvel for the time, as it was the first true open-world platformer that featured a dynamic loading system. This means that you could journey throughout the entire game, barring a few exceptions, without being interrupted. The game was also really well designed, which caused it to be a massive hit. So, with this hot new IP on their hands, Naughty Dog did the one thing that anyone would do in this situation. Completely change the formula. Alright, so before we get started, I just wanted to say something. All of my videos are opinion pieces, and aren't meant to discredit anyone. They're made to help fuel discussion, as well as provide a different view. I appreciate the feedback that I've gotten so far with these series of videos, and I have mad respect for anyone who enjoys the games that I don't end up liking, and vice versa. Everyone is allowed to have their own opinion on anything. With that being said, Jak II fucking reeks. So Jak II is a game where you play through linear levels that involve shooting, platforming, racing, and whack-a-mole that are all broken up in between open world sections. Think Grand Theft Auto, but for babies like myself. That also includes a much darker tone than what we had before. What was once a bright, cheery game about a guy going on an adventure to help change his best friend back to normal is now a dark, gritty game that loves the color gray, guns, car hijacking, and blasting shit into people's faces. We're gonna need context for the story because it is a follow-up of the previous game. The game starts off with Jak, Daxter, a mechanic named Kira, and a green eco-sage named Samos, activating a portal near their home. What comes out of the portal is a swarm of these insect-like creatures called the Metalheads. Before the group is gobbled up by the new threat, they blast away on their ship called the Rift Rider and are separated. Jak and Daxter end up crashing in the middle of this futuristic city, where Jak is promptly arrested while Daxter runs away. We skip forward 2 years to find out Jak is being tortured by getting injected with Dark Eco. Dark Eco is a type of energy that can transform or mutate whoever touches it. It's actually how Daxter ended up the way he is. Speaking of which, Daxter arrives on the scene, and before he can undo the lock on Jak's chains, the Dark Eco takes over Jak, and he breaks out of his restraints. Before he could hurt Daxter, he turns back into his normal self. This is where we get our first taste of gameplay. We control Jak while he escapes the prison. If you played the first Jak game, you'll be right at home here. He controls exactly how he did before. We do some platforming and some light combat. Overall, it's a pretty good intro mission to teach the player the basic moves. But I'll get back to these controls later on because there's a major flaw with them. Jak manages to escape the prison and runs into this old man named Kor, who is looking after a small child. Kor directs Jak to a resistance that was made to fight back against Baron Praxis, the man who is responsible for Jak being injected with Dark Eco. From there on, the game just sorta stops in terms of real plot progression. Jak joins the resistance to get revenge on Praxis, Jak reunites with his old friends, Daxter sits around and does absolutely nothing throughout the story. There's one interesting thing though. It's revealed halfway through the game that Haven City, where the game takes place, is actually the future. Apparently the monsters that were unleashed from the portal that Jak opened was the start of an apocalypse, and Haven City is the last bastion of sorts. And it's an interesting twist, but sadly not much is done with it. The story isn't super important, but the character writing is actually top notch. Jak was a mute in the first game, but giving him a voice here is actually a really good idea. It makes Jak's interactions with Daxter way more entertaining since the two are essentially opposites, and overall makes Jak way more memorable because of it. This game is actually pretty funny at times, despite the dark direction it went. You can see Naughty Dog's uncharted roots growing here. This isn't a super important piece of criticism. In fact, it could totally just be a nitpick on my part, but I feel as though a lot of the cutscene animation isn't very good. There's something about it that just feels robotic, especially Torn, who looks like he's breaking all the bones in his body with every movement. Alright, so this is the part where I lose my credibility, huh? So Jak II managed to pull off a pretty radical tonal shift really well, but I think the shift in gameplay was very sloppy and, if I'm being honest, poorly designed. There are a few good ideas here, but I feel as though they're either not very well implemented, clash with what was already set up, and worst of all, are very frustrating and not fun at all. I'll start with the obvious complaint first, because I'm pretty sure this one is shared with a lot of people. Haven City blows. Haven City is the main hub world for Jak II. In between missions, you're plot back into this dingy mess and have to take a vehicle to the next objective on your map. Sounds harmless on paper, but on closer inspection, there's a lot of problems with it. Haven City is a very cramped area. It's filled to the brim with pedestrians and vehicles to populate the city. Here's the problem. Since there are too many people in this city, on top of having guards constantly patrolling, you run the risk of crashing into something, causing your car to explode almost immediately. It doesn't help that the vehicles control like utter ass too. The handling is too stiff. Making tight turns is almost impossible, and because of how tight and smushed everything is, you'll be blowing up your car a lot. They also plaster crimson guards everywhere, so if you so much as tap them, they'll all be chasing after you, which can cause you to wreck your car because for some reason, a guard just loses their will to live and drives right into you. Haven City also lacks any extra activity for you to do that isn't just a scavenger hunt for items that don't really amount to anything during your main playthrough. A good open world should include any extra activity to help keep you engaged. But Haven City lacks anything that's worthwhile, so there's a lot of dead air between missions. You drive back and forth so many times that it feels like 40% of the game is just driving. I like Haven City in terms of context and aesthetics. The design of the city is actually really cool, with multiple areas that show differences between classes of citizens. This shit looks really cool, but overall the structure is little to no flow. It takes up far too much time with little to do. I would forgive it slightly if traversing the city was at least fun, but sadly that's not the case. The open world is only half of the equation. There's also the main meat of the game to cover, which are the missions, and oh boy, I've got a lot to say about the missions. So rather than following up with what Jak 1 wanted to do, Jak II went for a different approach. In Jak 1, technically every task could be considered optional because you didn't have to complete every task in the game to get enough power cells to finish the main story. Jak 2 gets rid of the optional missions for what can I only assume be more focused design on each one. There are 3 different types of missions in Jak 2. There are the standard ones that involve both platforming and shooting while you get to the end of the stage, or in some cases, take out as many targets that are listed. Missions that involve you piloting a vehicle of some sort. This can be a race, an escort mission, or delivery-styled fetch quest. And the final type of mission that I'll classify the category because why not. I'll be going through a general overview of these missions and won't go into a lot of detail with every mission because that would simply be boring.
And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here?
A good majority of Jak 2's missions are your standard on-foot missions. The first couple ones have a much higher focus on platforming akin to the first Jak game. I'm not gonna lie, when I first started to play this game, I was actually really enjoying these missions. The controls and level design work really well to provide a tough but fair challenge that is very rewarding as well as very fun. But then you get a gun and everything goes to shit from there. It took only about like an hour for that to happen. Alright, so this is one of the major changes Jak 2 brings to the table, and in my opinion, for the worse. You see, the original Jak and Daxter wasn't designed with a lot of combat in mind. There were some enemies that you did have to deal with at points, but they would generally die in 1 or 2 hits. You could also choose to avoid them if you really wanted to. Jak 2 starts off with the same design in mind, but the moment you get your first weapon, the scattergun, everything changes. Jak 2 has 4 different kinds of weapons that are introduced throughout the game. There's the scattergun, which is a shotgun weapon that has a pretty low fire rate and a pretty low damage output. The blaster, a long-range rifle with a slight auto-targeting system. It has decent damage and a decent fire rate, making it the best choice in most scenarios, especially if you do the trick where you jump, spin, then shoot. That's when its true power is unleashed. There's the Vulcan Fury, which is a rapid-fire gun that eats through its ammo and is generally disappointing. Then there's the final weapon, the Peacekeeper. This weapon honestly sucks. It has 10 shots, the damage is moderate, but the overall usefulness is pitifully low since you don't get a lot of ammo for it through the pickups, and the electricity spread does almost 0 damage. The only time I ever found it useful was during the boss fight against Crew. Jak also has this new ability called Dark Jak. It's pretty much this game's version of Devil Trigger, but it's pretty useless. The melee attacks home in on enemies, but I've gotten very disoriented from Jak flying around the screen at the speed of sound. Dark Jak has a few special abilities that you can use, but it drains the Dark Jak meter instantly. They are powerful moves, but it takes too long for it to charge up, making me forget I even have the form multiple times. You know how I said earlier that Jak controlled like he did in the first game? Well, this presents a major issue. Jak wasn't designed with these weapons in mind, meaning that fighting enemies in this game is very clunky and very annoying. The only thing you have to help you out is the auto-aim that the game gives you for a few weapons. But the problem is the auto-aim is so pathetic that it gives up on an enemy if it moves as so much as 2 inches. Fighting ranged enemies is a bitch since their accuracy is far too high. You have to try to predict their attack instead of reacting to it in order to avoid taking damage. Whenever I got hit, I felt like it was unfair. This isn't the kind of game that should include touch damage, and there are far too many times where a projectile came off screen, causing me to get hit. The game says you have 8 hit points, but in reality you actually have 4, since almost every enemy does 2 points of damage. Well, was this supposed to be a joke? But the worst part about these missions are their design. You see, the on-foot missions will test you, and I mean test you. There are so many do or die scenarios, bullshit enemy placements, and the awful checkpoint system that could potentially make you stuck on any one of these missions for hours at a time. Take this mission for example. You need to make it to the end of this pier while trying to avoid literally everything in the world from killing you. It's very simple on paper, but holy shit, it's horrible in execution. There are far too many enemies, making it almost impossible to shoot all of them to proceed. I think you're supposed to just run away from them, so I try that. Of course, these guys also have guns, so I use the jetboard to try to outrun them. Problem number 2, you can easily fall off the pier when you use the jetboard, causing a turret to come out of the water and instantly kill you. It's so easy just to fall off the platform in this level, and in the open world, this turret doesn't exist. Shouldn't the slower movement be punishing enough? And probably the worst part about this mission is that you can get stuck on other NPCs that are just in the way for some reason. This has caused me to die more times than I can count. Despite the fact that you can finish this mission in about 1 minute with a flawless run, it took me over an hour to finish it the first time through because of how bullshit the placement of these obstacles are. That's just one of the missions, and it's also one of the easier ones in my opinion. Some of the missions can go on for too long, and someone at Naughty Dog really hates checkpoints. You can be really far in a 10-minute mission, bite the bullet near the end, and then have to redo it all over again. There was a point where it occurred to me that there's another game that shares the same design philosophy as Jak II, except I believe it does it infinitely better. I know it's a bit cliche for a reviewer to mention this game when it comes to comparing challenging games, but I believe that it fits perfectly for this example. Cuphead is a side-scrolling shooter that has an emphasis on boss battles, but it also offers a second type of stage called running guns. These stages actually remind me a lot of Jak II. They're point A to point B shooting levels with sprinkles of platforming, and give you access to different types of firing modes to customize the way you play. Both games are brutal in their difficulty, but for different reasons. Cuphead is very fair when it comes to its challenge. Every move an enemy makes is telegraphed in one way or another. Bullets that fly across the screen are never impossibly fast, and there's always a safe spot if you're aware of all your surroundings. Levels in Cuphead are also very short and can be finished only a few minutes on average. Anytime you fail, you can quickly make it back to the point where you did fail and try again. Oh yeah, since Cuphead is a 2D game, you can always see where the projectiles are coming from. That means you can't get fucking blindsided all the time.
You may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile.
The vehicle missions in Jak II are a pain in the ass. It doesn't help that most of these take place in the open world. There are two different types of vehicle missions. The ones where you're doing an objective in the open world under a time limit of some sort, or the races. The former missions are some of the most frustrating missions in the game, especially any mission that requires you to rescue characters and deliver them to certain spots on the map. The issues I already brought up about Haven City come back in full force here, since it's actually impossible to avoid everything when there's so much going on. Plus, the handling of the vehicles they make you use are actually the worst thing in the world. Sometimes you can find yourself barely able to scrape by because of how much damage you take, or just straight up crashing and having to restart from the very beginning, because that's always fun, right? There was this one mission in particular that I'll never forget. During the last third of the game, there are these walking tanks that are heading towards the resistance base, and it's up to you to destroy them before they can make it there. I hate this mission so much. The tanks have too much health, and if they shoot at you, they'll never miss. I failed multiple times because I've ran out of ammo in my weapons that actually did damage. It got to the point where I would start the mission after breaking the ammo boxes, just so I can refill to do another attempt. This is not good design. The races? Those ones are actually not super bad if I'm being honest. There's some bullshit though. If you hit a wall and your bike isn't destroyed, it straight up loses its top speed, making it almost impossible to recover. The track design is filled with risky shortcuts that actually do require some skill to take. I was even shocked to see how fair and challenging they were in comparison to the rest of the game. Even the bike race against Errol in the city is actually pretty fair. You just need to be precise and hit the rings that are scattered throughout the cities and you can beat them no problem. So credit where credit is due, Jak II. The other ones are still shit! In this section, I'll just give an overview for the more gimmicky levels really. There isn't a lot to talk about in terms of their actual design, rather just how out of place they feel. Most of these missions have 0 point to the overall plot or any relation to anything else you do in the game. They sort of just show up as little filler missions in an already long game. It doesn't help that these are really easy and quite frankly boring. There's a mission where you need to play whack-a-mole for no reason other than Daxter to attempt to show off. This minigame isn't even fun, it's just Simon Says. It goes on for far too long as well, like seriously, we're just wasting time here at this point. Some of the on-foot missions feel very gimmicky as well. There's a mission where you need to use your jetboard to go fast enough to catch up to these flying metalheads. The metalheads fly around in different routes, and it's only a matter of just following them until they let you capture them. Because why not? Use this turret to defeat hundreds of Crimson Guards and blow up a bunch of ships. Because why not? Use your jetboard to deposit bombs at specific locations because Vin and Daxter are so stupid that they armed them before the mission began. Because why not? God, I hate this mission. You barely have enough time to make it to all the deposit zones even if you know where you're going. This mission is nothing but trial and error and I absolutely hate it for that reason. But the cream of the crop has to be the missions in the Titan suit. Ew. It's slow, clunky, sucks at combat, and is overall a downgrade. It's so stiff, making jumps is a bitch, and combined with that classic Jak II do or die design, you have to restart the entire missions if you die. Jak II is a game that has a lot of good ideas, but it's brought down by the mission design, shitty open world, and just sheer frustration it can bring you. I understand why people can like this game, I really do. I think that whenever this game focuses more on platforming, it's really good. Mars Tomb is my favorite area of the game because it's mostly platforming with little combat. It's the closest the game gets to being the same quality as Jak I. I enjoy the writing in this game a lot more than I did the first time I played it. The humor is on point, and a lot of the character interactions are fun. This gameplay simply just doesn't do it for me. I've played through it about 3 times, and I'm always drained by the time I get to the final missions of the game. The only thing that really pushed me into finishing it was the thought of never playing it again and just going to Jak III. If you like Jak II, I won't try to take that away from you. That's not the kind of person I am. In fact, I'd love to hear why you enjoy this game, as long as we agree to keep it civil in the comments. I'm not looking to start a war. Not yet anyways.